A silent exodus is happening, almost invisible yet impossible to deny. A quiet movement, rarely spoken of, but already reshaping the heart of humanity. It's precisely the most conscious ones, the most awakened and psychologically developed, who are withdrawing from the usual social structures. They don't leave in protest. They don't vanish in rebellion. They simply fade away. They unplug from the grid, walk away from social media, abandon promising careers, end relationships that no longer resonate with their truth. And little by little, they choose solitude over artificial social life. Carl Jung foresaw this movement. He called it the necessary withdrawal. And here's why. When someone becomes psychologically aware at a profound level, taking part in the collective unconscious stops being just uncomfortable. It becomes physically painful. This isn't a metaphor. It's real pain. Pain in the body, in the psyche, in the very structure of one's being. And now I'll reveal why Jung believed this disappearing act isn't just inevitable for those who awaken, but absolutely essential. Why? Because the more conscious you become, the less capable you are of tolerating so-called normal society. And no, this isn't spiritual bypassing, nor escapism. It's a survival mechanism of the psyche when surrounded by the crushing weight of mass unconsciousness. If you've been feeling the call to withdraw, to vanish, to leave it all behind, Jung would say, you're not antisocial, you're not broken, you're simply becoming too conscious to fit inside the collective container. Here's what Jung understood, and it changes everything. Society only functions on the basis of the collective unconscious. It's sustained by shared delusions, mass projections, and mutually accepted shadows. And this isn't a flaw in the system. This is the system. It only keeps spinning if everyone agrees to participate unconsciously. But the moment someone truly awakens, not just intellectually, but psychologically, that person becomes like a crack in the matrix. Suddenly, they can see the projections everyone else is living inside. They recognize the shadows everyone avoids. They notice the unconscious games everyone is playing without realizing it. And once you see, you can't unsee. Jung himself went through this. As his awareness expanded, he found that ordinary social interaction became almost unbearable. Not because he was arrogant, but because he was awake in a room full of people still asleep. Every conversation demanded that he pretend not to see what he saw, that he pretend not to know what he knew, that he hide his vision of what was really happening beneath the surface. That's the curse of consciousness. You become psychologically alone, even when you're physically surrounded by people. It's as if you speak a different language, see into other dimensions, live in a reality most can't even access. And the effort of building bridges, of translating your vision back into the collective unconscious, becomes a heavy burden, almost unbearable. The awakened don't begin to disappear because they hate society, but because staying inside it requires them to betray themselves. Each day asks them to pretend they're still asleep. Each interaction demands they dim their light. Each relationship begs them to be less than who they've truly become. And eventually, the psyche itself says, enough, withdraw. Protect your awareness. Don't let the collective unconscious drain what you fought so hard to achieve. Jung discovered something even more unsettling. The more someone integrates their personal shadow, the more unbearable it becomes to witness the collective shadow. Suddenly, you see an entire society projecting its own darkness while denying it even exists. If you've stared into your own abyss, watching others dump theirs onto scapegoats becomes excruciating. If you've integrated your own darkness, hearing phrases like, "That political party is the evil one. That group is the problem. Those people are what's wrong," feels like witnessing a mass psychosis on a collective scale. And that's exactly what it is. Jung gave this phenomenon a name: the burden of seeing. The one who awakens realizes something both terrifying and liberating. Most social conflicts are nothing more than shadow projections. Wars are nothing but collective shadows colliding. Political divisions are mass projections, and the outrage on social media is nothing more than the material of the collective shadow searching for new targets. And once you see this, participation becomes impossible. You can't join the crowd once you realize it's hunting its own shadow. You can't take sides when you understand that both are merely projecting their own darkness. You can't embrace collective guilt once you recognize it as nothing more than collective unconsciousness in action. Thus, withdrawal isn't about superiority. It's about a profound psychological necessity. One of Jung's students described this with striking clarity. I used to have strong political opinions, but then I integrated my shadow and realized that all my opinions were nothing but projections. Now, when I watch political debates, I see two groups of people violently projecting their unconscious material onto each other while calling it justice or truth. I can no longer take part. It would be like plunging into a collective delusion. But there is something even deeper happening. The awakened are not only seeing the collective shadow, they are feeling it. When you become conscious, your energetic sensitivity intensifies. Being surrounded by unconscious shadow projections feels like enduring an invisible psychological assault. And this isn't judgment, it's genuine energetic incompatibility. Jung experienced this in his own life. After his individuation process, being in crowds became almost unbearable, not because he disliked people, but because he could feel the unconscious material swirling all around him, projections, repressions, shadows, creating a psychological storm of which only he was aware. And that is why the awakened disappear from social media first. These platforms are nothing less than continuous shadow projection machines. Every scroll is an attack of unconscious energy. Every comment section becomes a battleground of shadow boxing. For someone who has integrated their own shadow, it's like being forced to watch people beating themselves while blaming others for the bruises. Jung's second realization is even more impactful. After individuation, after moving toward your authentic self, playing the persona becomes impossible, and society demands nothing but persona performance. Before awakening, you could unconsciously play the social games, smile when expected, say the right words, play the role required. But once you've touched your authentic self, that deep truth behind all masks, returning to persona performance feels like a psychological death. Every social situation demands performance. The persona at work, the role in the family, the identity on social media, the acceptable opinions, the appropriate emotions. For someone still identified with the persona, this feels normal. For someone who has found the self, it feels like suffocation, an invisible prison. Jung discovered this in his own life. After confronting the unconscious, he could no longer play the role of the respectable Swiss psychiatrist. He could no longer pretend to agree with collective opinions when he could clearly see what was behind the masks. He could no longer maintain relationships that demanded falseness. So, he withdrew to Bollingen, his tower by the lake, where he could finally be authentically himself. This is not antisocial, it is pro-authenticity. The awakened person doesn't reject society out of anger, but out of incompatibility. They've become too real for environments that demand falseness, too authentic for spaces that require performance, too whole for containers that only accept fragments. One of his patients, a successful executive who had gone through individuation, described this impossibility in moving words. I sit in board meetings and everyone is playing their roles as executives, saying what executives are supposed to say, thinking what executives are supposed to think. I can't do it anymore. It feels as if I'm being asked to pretend to be someone I never was. My authentic self has no voice in that room. Only my persona did, and she's dead. She didn't resign in some dramatic gesture. She simply disappeared, slowly, over months, moving to a small town where she could be real instead of just successful, not out of failure, but out of the success of having finally found herself. And this is happening everywhere. The awakened are leaving careers that demand persona performance, ending relationships built on falseness, walking away from social circles that require masks. They're not failing at society. They're steadily discovering the freedom of being authentic. They end relationships rooted in false selves. They leave behind social groups that demand masks. They're not failing in society. They are, in fact, succeeding in authenticity. And that success makes it impossible to remain within the machinery of society. Here's what Jung understood in terms of energy. Maintaining consciousness in an unconscious environment requires a monumental amount of psychological effort, and the awakened realize it's simply not sustainable. Think about what a conscious person must do in normal society. Constantly filter out the unconscious projections around them, hold boundaries against energy vampires, endlessly translate between depth and surface, sustain their own frequency while surrounded by noise, process not only their own material but also the unconscious material that everyone else is constantly leaking. Jung called this psychological work. The invisible labor-conscious people perform just to exist in spaces dominated by the unconscious. It is exhausting. Every interaction demands that you don't react to projections, don't absorb other people's unconscious material, don't get pulled into collective dramas, don't lower yourself to the surrounding unconscious frequency, don't betray your own truth just to keep harmony. For the unconscious, this isn't even work. They simply drift with the collective current. But for the awakened, it's like swimming against a tsunami of unconsciousness. And eventually, you have to get out of the water or drown. Jung noticed that his most conscious patients often developed chronic fatigue, mysterious illnesses, and depression, not because of personal pathology, but because of the sheer exhaustion of holding consciousness in unconscious environments. And the cure wasn't in therapy. It was in the strategic withdrawal from environments that drained their energy. One of his patients, a teacher who had awakened after years of inner work, developed severe chronic fatigue. Medical tests showed nothing wrong, but during analysis with Jung, she realized she was spending an enormous amount of energy just to keep her consciousness active, while spending her days surrounded by unconscious colleagues and students. She wasn't sick. She was energetically depleted. When she left teaching and moved to a small cabin in nature, her energy returned within weeks, not because of rest, but because she no longer had to fight to sustain her consciousness against the constant pressure of the collective unconscious. That's why the awakened disappear into nature, into solitude, into small conscious communities. Not to escape responsibility, but to preserve the consciousness they worked so hard to develop. They understand that consciousness is precious and finite. Wasting it on unconscious interactions is like trying to fill sand with water. Jung identified this withdrawal as an archetype, the hermit phase, which every person in the process of individuation must pass through, not permanently, but necessarily. The psyche demands solitude to integrate what society would otherwise fragment. The hermit archetype isn't about misanthropy, it's about profound psychological necessity. When you're transforming at a fundamental level, you need space away from influences that would pull you back into old patterns. You need silence to hear your own inner voice. You need solitude to integrate your discoveries without external interference. Jung himself went through deep hermit phases. His years in Bollingen were not vacations, not pleasant escapes. They were psychological necessity, pure and simple. He needed distance from the collective consciousness to develop his individual consciousness. He needed separation from other people's projections to explore and understand the depths of his own being. And that's exactly what's happening right now with people going through the awakening process. They're not disappearing because they're weak or antisocial. They're following an ancient archetypal pattern demanded by individuation itself. The hermit phase is the time when the personal shadow is integrated without the social pressure to repress it. The self emerges without the suffocating demands of the persona. Inner wisdom unfolds without the noise of the outside world. Psychological transformation completes itself without interruption. But Jung emphasized something crucial. The hermit phase is not an escape, it's preparation. The awakened person steps back, not to abandon society, but to develop something society desperately needs. They are gestating wisdom, integrating profound truths, becoming what Jung once called aquarium fish, beings adapted to depths that others could never reach. One of his analysans, a philosopher, disappeared from academic life for 3 years. Everyone believed he had suffered a breakdown. In reality, he had experienced an extraordinary breakthrough. In solitude, he integrated perceptions and insights that would have been impossible while maintaining his academic persona. When he returned, he brought revolutionary ideas that could only emerge through stepping away from the very system he would later help transform. The hermit phase may look like disappearance, but in truth, it's a profound inner dive. The awakened one is not running away. They are going deeper than society allows. They're carrying out a work that can only be done in solitude, developing a consciousness that eventually can serve the collective, but only after it's fully formed. And Jung's final vision offers hope. Those who disappear don't remain absent forever. When they return transformed, not to rejoin unconsciousness, but to offer consciousness to those ready to receive it. The awakened who disappear following the hero's journey, withdrawal, transformation, preparation, return with gifts. But the return is not to mainstream society. It's to the edges, the margins, the spaces where consciousness can exist without compromise. They become the so-called border dwellers, present but not participants, available but not absorbed. They may return as artists, creating from authentic depths, as healers, working with individuals ready to awaken, as teachers, sharing with small groups of seekers, as writers, offering maps for other vanished souls, as guides, helping those beginning their own withdrawal. But they never return to the mainstream flow of society. They can't. Once you individuate, you can't unindividuate. Once you become conscious, you can't pretend unconsciousness. Once you find your true self, you can't live from the persona. Jung observed this pattern again and again. His patients, who truly individuated, rarely went back to their former lives. They created new ones, simpler, quieter, more authentic. They found ways to contribute without sacrificing their consciousness. They learned how to give without being consumed. One patient, a therapist, disappeared for 2 years. When she returned, it wasn't to traditional practice, but to work with a small group of individuals in spiritual crisis. She could no longer do general therapy, only work with those going through what she herself had endured. Her practice was tiny, but deep, invisible to ordinary society, but a lifeline for those awakening. This is the model. Awakened people disappearing from mass society, but reappearing in conscious pockets, creating parallel structures, building alternatives, offering depth to those who seek it, while remaining invisible to those who aren't ready. Jung believed this was evolution in action. Not everyone awakens at the same time. The pioneers disappear first, create new spaces, and later become beacons for the next wave. What looks like abandonment is actually architecture. It's the building of the structures that will sustain the collective awakening when the time comes. Summing up Jung's vision of why spiritually awakened people are disappearing, They can no longer tolerate the collective shadow projected by unconscious society. Their authentic self can no longer sustain the persona demanded by culture. The energy required to maintain consciousness in unconscious spaces becomes unsustainable. They enter the hermit phase demanded by individuation. Eventually, they return, but only to conscious margins, not to unconscious centers. This disappearance is not failure. It's not weakness, but wisdom. It's not abandonment, but an archetypal necessity. The awakened follow a pattern as old as consciousness itself: withdraw, transform, and return transformed. But to society, it feels like loss, abandonment, even betrayal. Where have all the conscious people gone? Why are the wisest voices growing quieter? Why do those who have awakened seem to step back at the very moment the collective needs them most? Jung offers us a different perspective. They are not abandoning the collective. They are preparing something for it. In their withdrawal, they are developing what the collective consciousness is not yet ready to receive. In their disappearance, they are creating spaces where others can also disappear. In their silence, they are gestating words the collective is not yet able to hear. If you feel the call to disappear, Jung would want you to know this is not spiritual escapism. It's a psychological necessity. Your consciousness has expanded to a point where participating in collective unconsciousness is no longer possible without betraying yourself. The withdrawal you feel is not antisocial, it's archetypal. You are not abandoning society. You are walking the hermit's path that every individuating person must take. You are not weak for being unable to tolerate unconsciousness. You are conscious, and consciousness requires different conditions than sleep. Allow yourself to disappear, not forever, but for now. Find your refuge, whether in physical solitude or in psychological distance. Stop spending your consciousness on unconscious interactions. Stop performing for audiences that cannot see you. Stop translating your depth into surface terms. Your disappearance is not selfish, it's necessary. The collective needs people who have fully individuated more than it needs shallow participants. It needs depth more than surface, authenticity more than performance, consciousness more than conformity. And when you return, if you return, you will bring gifts that could only have been developed in disappearance. You will offer what could not be given while maintaining false belonging. You will speak truths that could not be spoken while performing acceptance. The spiritually awakened are disappearing because that's what awakening requires. Not permanently, but necessarily. Not out of hatred, but out of love. Love of truth, of consciousness, of authenticity. Love that whispers, I must become whole, even if it means being alone. Jung would say, disappear consciously. Withdraw with purpose. Use your hermit phase for integration, not isolation. And remember, your disappearance is preparing something. You're not leaving the collective. You're pioneering the place it will eventually need to go. If you feel the call to disappear or withdraw, know that you are not alone on this path. Subscribe to this channel where I explore Jung's insights for those walking the path of individuation. Watch now the video on your screen about the hermit archetype and discover how to use withdrawal for transformation, not escape. Remember, your disappearance is not abandonment, it's evolution. And the collective needs evolved individuals far more than it needs conforming participants. If you've made it this far, it's because something deep inside you is calling for more, for a purer truth, a sharper awareness, and a more intimate connection with the unseen force that gives shape to the visible. And now, I want to share with you something that will expand your consciousness even further. Get ready to take the next step. I present to you the Map of the Higher Self, a powerful ebook born from my most intense and authentic experiences. It brings together practices, insights, and mental keys that will guide you on a path of clarity, presence, and inner awakening. But it doesn't stop there. When you get the book, You'll also receive free access to the Sacred Library, an exclusive digital collection of rare, forbidden works removed from our history, hidden texts that reveal what has been concealed from humanity for centuries and is now within your reach. This map is not just a book, it's a tool for transformation. If you've arrived here, it's no accident. This is a sign. You're ready to elevate your perception and take control of your own reality. Click the link in the pinned comment and dive into this journey of self-knowledge with courage, focus, and awareness. And don't stop here. I've handpicked 2 essential videos that will expand even further everything we explored today. Choose one and keep exploring the deeper layers of your being. Remember, the truth is not found in the noise of the world, but in the silent voice of awakening consciousness.